good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. My name is Kunal, and basically, I'll be talking about data science and what and how it is adding to risk analytics today. The introduction is already done, so I would, before going to the next steps, I'll just set some ground rules. So I think it's mostly going to be a monologue in the beginning where I'll just finish the presentation. Please keep posting your questions. I think that has already been told to you, and I will answer in the end all your questions. So just keep posting them. Don't wait till the end in terms of posting your questions. Setting the expectations. I know that there are people from varied backgrounds, so the expectation is to give food for thought to everyone. One who knows data science but wants to know more about risk analytics, one who knows risk management but wants to see the application of data science, and thirdly, those who are interested in both. If you do not belong to any of these categories, you're still welcome. So this is the agenda for today. It's just an overview kind of a thing, like why data science. Many of you who are enthusiastic about data science would have heard about these 3 V's, which is volume, velocity, and variety. Then we'll talk about the relationship of risk analytics and data science and how data science has been leveraged, not just today, but for decades actually. We'll talk a bit about fraud analytics to an extent. I will then talk about a mini case on operational risk for a pharmaceutical manufacturer, and then I'll talk about next steps. So let me begin with why data science. Of course, you have the reasons, which is it adds competitive value. It prepares for likely scenarios which may happen, and that's where the predictive analytics comes into the picture. At many companies, it drives the strategy and operations. Of course, you need to be careful where do you apply data science and to what extent you apply. And of course, it helps design measurable feedback systems, which is very, very important in any industry, in any business. Measuring whatever you do is very important, and that is where data analytics, data science, data mining comes into the fore. Now the question is, why has data science become so popular in the last few years? One of the big reasons for that is, of course, big data, and I'll be covering those 3 V's as I told you earlier. The chart here basically tells you that the difference between underperformers and outperformers of how they use their data. So given these statistics, most of the companies these days are moving towards using data science in every of their functions. And today, of course, I'll be talking specifically for the risk management or the risk analytics perspective. Starting with the volume of data, this is just to give you an idea. I think everyone would have seen this or known by now. You guys would have seen this like a gazillion times, but this is just to bring home the point about how we are just surrounded with data. So you have like 2.5 quintillion bytes of data being generated every day. Quintillion is basically 18 zeros put with 2.5. Of course, there are so many examples of the amount of data that is being generated today. If going from volume, we will basically now go on to the variety of data that is there, which kind of adds into the data that we have. You can have data from Twitter, you can have data from Facebook, you can have data from videos. There are lot of wearable and wireless health monitors which are out there, which are generating data every day, every second. So you basically have lots and lots of data out there, and of course you also have the velocity of data, or the frequency or the rate of data creation. In a car, usually there are 100 sensors. Imagine the amount of data generated every ride. Now that we have the data and a reason to use data science, what do we need? of course, skilled people. And this is where this is a definition which is like very general. There are a lot of things that a data scientist usually does, from spotting the patterns, trying to find insights out of that data. But broadly, these are the three skill sets that you see on your screen right now, which a data scientist should have. One, the knowledge or the technical knowledge, which is computer science or business intelligence as they say it. Secondly, the maths and statistics behind the concepts. Um, if that is something, and people usually have one, two, and I have never seen someone with all the three skill sets, but people usually have one of these, and they usually move around the circle and try to move in the other circle, so that they can at least move more closer to being a data scientist. And thirdly, and the most important, is of course domain expertise. I feel that this is the most important skill set as compared to the normal technical computer science background or the math and statistics skill set. The other two quite literally becomes academic if you do not have the domain expertise. Given this background, I would like to start with the risk analytics and how data science is being used to do risk analytics for a number of years now. And of course, as I already mentioned earlier, big data has given a new impetus to how we go about doing risk analytics. So there are various industries which use risk analytics. There are various functions within an industry which deploy or there's always actually risk management in all the industries, but it depends upon on which functions do we apply the risk analytics. It could be for a finance, it could be a financial risk analytics, it could be an operational risk analytics, it could be a marketing risk analytics, if you look at it from a functional perspective. If you look at it from an industry perspective, you have these banks which usually use it. You have healthcare industry which uses risk analytics. You have the normal CPG industries which uses risk analytics, and I will talk about. You have the pharmaceutical industries, of course, the case with which I'm going to talk today. But all of them go back to the previous question, which is what actually is risk management. So risk management as defined is an identification, assessment, and prioritization of risk, followed by coordinated and economical application of resources to minimize, monitor, and control the probability or impact of unfortunate events. So let me make this like in plain simple words. It's basically identifying the sources of risk and then prioritizing which risk we need to look at all the scenarios which the risk creates, and then accordingly act on that to minimize your failure or to minimize your loss. Because the moment when you say risk, it is more or less trying to minimize the loss that you usually have. Applied across industries, it is basically applied across financial risk analytics. And so as I already mentioned, that there are a lot of functions and industries across which risk analytics is being applied. But today I will mostly talk about one of the two main buckets, which is the financial risk analytics and the operational risk analytics. The case is on operational risk analytics, but I'll also to an extent talk about financial risk analytics also. Broadly, again, financial risk analytics, the top three risks which usually all the retail banks talk about is the liquidity risk, the credit risk, and the fraud risk analytics. So we'll talk about the fraud risk in some detail, as in I'll devote more time to fraud risk analytics, but I'll to an extent also talk about liquidity and credit risk. Now, banks usually are in the business of selling liquidity, and pursuing profit necessarily thins capitalization and leaves little margin for error. So it's not easy to predict liquidity risk because the chances of it happening is kind of binary. So how do you use data science into it? You try to predict the events which precede these liquidity risk events. If a particular company or a bank goes into or there is a high liquidity risk or there is a chance of a bankruptcy, what happens is that there are certain events which happen before it, and this is where data science comes into the picture, where it tries to predict these events. Now the problem is that these events don't happen on a regular basis, and you will find that even with the fraud analytics that I'll talk about in my next slide. Because these events don't happen so frequently, it is not easy to predict them. But then, given the advent of big data, because we have so much of data, we can actually start to model these kind of uh, random or rare events that happen. The second risk is basically the credit risk. In credit risk, basically what you try to do is you calculate the probability of loan defaults. As a company, I would want to know, or as a bank, I would want to know whether my creditor will default or not default. Traditionally, what happens is when you give a loan to a creditor, you usually look at his current situation, at his current capability. But what data science does, or what big data does, is now you can look at the future, or you can look continuously at how the credibility of creditor changes with time. You can look through the bank transactions that creditor would have done. You can look at, let's say, some kind of a conversation on a phone conversation that person would have done, or that creditor would have done. It could be a person, individual person, it could be a company. It also depends on if you have some kind of a social media data on that particular company. Of course, there are other things, like you can have share prices if it's a company, you can have income levels if it's an individual person. So all these factors are usually considered when you're trying to calculate the probability of loan default. And this, again, it's data science which helps to calculate that probability, or get the model through which you can get the credit lining. The third kind of um, risk analytics in a financial risk domain is the fraud risk, and I'm going to talk in detail about it. Uh, as in, I'm going to give a little bit more time. I'll also give an example which recently happened with me a few weeks ago. Secondly, on the second bucket that we'll talk about today is the operational risk analytics. Now, in any business, operations is the one which is affected by lot of forces. Think of, let's say, I think many of you would have already heard about the Porter 5 forces theory. So all these forces leads to different kinds of operational risk on a business, and which leads to certain scenarios which needs to be prevented. And this is where again data science comes into the picture, where what we try to do is we try to predict the kind of risks that could happen. On that basis, we create scenarios. Once we have created that scenarios, then as a business, we are ready to deal with each one of them. And then as of today, we try to make sure that the actions that we take today uh, tries to cover, if not most of the scenarios, most of the risk scenarios that we have created. Today's case will also talk about that. It's a mini case, so it talks about how we can create scenarios, how we can prepare accordingly. Now, going back to fraud analytics, so what usually happens in fraud analytics is that you are trying to predict a fraud. It could be um, in an example, let's say if I am transacting something online and if there is some kind of a fraud going on, then as a retail bank, we need to find out if there is a certain fraud for a certain transaction. One example could be that a particular person usually spends a certain amount in a month, and then suddenly there's a spike in his spending which is much more higher than earlier. Then that's like one of the most simplest ways of saying or predicting that maybe there is a fraud going on. And how do you find it technically? How do you find it mathematically? You find it through the help of outliers. So usually you have a uniform kind of a consumption or a uniform kind of transaction through a bank. So I'm giving an example through, let's say, a credit card example. So you usually spend uniformly, or there are certain things which you usually do, and then suddenly if there is some kind of an outlier, it could be an outlier in terms of not just the amount that you spend, but also the location from which the transactions have been made. For example, if you usually make your transactions online from 2 or 3 locations usually, and if suddenly the city changes, now that's an outlier. So outlier is not just about the amount that you spend or the values that you get. It is also about these categorical values that you have when you look at bank transactions. Now, how does again data science come into the picture? These outliers, they have certain patterns, and what would you like to do is try to model these outliers. If you model these outliers, you can actually predict when the fraud is going to happen. You may think it's a rare and a random event, but the outliers outliers are usually defined to be random. But with so much computational power and big data, it is this ability to model these outliers which helps us with fraud analytics. Just to give you an example of something which happened with me a few weeks ago, this is what came to me. This was a mail which literally came to my inbox, which said that we are concerned that some recent transactions on your account might not have been authorized by you. We tried to call you to verify the transaction but did not reach you. To protect your account, we need to confirm this activity with you. I thought this was just like an email which did not need any action. Of course, they blocked my account in the next 7 days. How did they find that out? Of course, there would be a lot of modeling going on behind it. And the reason was that I asked them the reason why or which transaction, what is the transaction because of which they think that it's a fraudulent transaction. I had basically booked a flight from Chicago to Seattle, and they felt it was a scam because there were some fraudulent transactions going on specifically in that time period for that airline. And the pattern of my booking matched with the model that they had created. So it's basically this ability of data analytics to model these outliers, which helps us to execute fraud analytics. So this kind of, to an extent, ends the financial analytics part. Now I will move on to the next part, which is a small mini case on a pharma manufacturer. Usually, I could have easily taken a case on financial risk analytics, which is majorly where risk analytics is used. But I also feel that risk management is there in every business, and that's the reason why I picked up a pharmaceutical manufacturer. Though from whatever fields you are in, you can easily relate to the example or to the case that I am giving right now. Okay. And before I move on to the case, please post your questions. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them to the best of my capacity. Okay. So a pharmaceutical manufacturer has a strategic business decision to make. It has to make a capacity strategy which needs to be made today on the basis of certain factors. There are a lot of factors which go into making a strategy. So I am not going to go into details of every one of them. I mean, it could be, beside these four factors, there could be geographic location of an asset, timing of opening the asset. There could be some kind of a long-term business strategy of acquiring more customers, or taking a loss and trying to increase market share. So there are a lot of other factors which I have not considered, but these are basically the four main factors that I've considered for the case: the type of drug, the demand for the drug, the suppliers who are going to give me the raw materials or the finished subparts of my drugs, and the choice of my asset, specialized versus flexible. Now I'll just try to explain the specialized versus flexible unit. So by specialized, what I mean is that if I have like two types of drug, A and B, and in our case we have two types of drug, A and B, I need to have two different or one individual unit for each drug. So I'll need to have two units for A and B, whereas a flexible unit is a unit which can produce both A and B. Of course, flexible unit comes with its own cost, and specialized will be a little cheaper. But then if you look at the long term, you will find that there are trade-offs between getting a specialized unit and a flexible unit. And this is something that we need to decide. Now, looking at these, you may feel, where does data science come into the picture? Well, it's not apparent, but basically the type of a drug in a pharmaceutical industry has to go through a cycle where FDA needs to approve it. So there is a certain probability of the drug being approved, which needs to be accounted for. And what happens in this industry is that the moment when your drug has been approved, you need to start the production as quickly as possible, because you have a patent life. And if you do not produce during that period, you're going to miss billions and billions of dollars of profit. So today you need to decide that what is the probability of a drug being approved, and according to that, get ready with your production plans, get ready with your units. Demand, again, if you go back, demand forecasting is something which is very, very important. Again, data science comes into the picture. The accuracy of that demand is very, very important, because on that basis, I'm going to look at the capacity of the units being used. Suppliers, again, very important. How does data science again come into the picture? Reliability of the suppliers. And again, reliability of the suppliers can again be modeled or measured on the basis of data science. Choice of asset, so it's an effect of your type of drug, demand, and suppliers. And of course, there are other things like financial constraints, which I am not right now looking at. Now, when we talk about drug approval probability, there are a lot of factors on which it kind of depends. It depends upon whether it's a large molecule drug or a small molecule drug. There are a lot of areas in which your drug could be in. It could be an oncology drug. It could be a cancer drug. It could be an infectious disease drug. Now, all these factors actually contribute to being approved or not being approved by the FDA. And you need to model that. Demand forecasting. There are two types of, I'll talk about in details, both for drug approval probability and demand forecasting. There are again two types of forecasting: the time series forecasting and the cause and effect forecasting. Both of them needs, of course, knowledge of models and knowledge of how usually demand forecasting works. as already mentioned to you, supply reliability, lead time variability, and raw material quality. So these are again things which need to be modeled, and your supply reliability completely depends upon how much time the supplier takes for your raw materials, or in this case, finished molecules to come to your plant. So let's go into detail on drug approval probability. So what I'll try to do in this case is zoom in and zoom out, as in go into the details and then go out and try to talk at the strategic level. So you should be ready. And I think as business professionals, we should all be ready to go into the details and then come out. Think broadly, but keep going to the details. So that's the reason why I have mentioned the data sources from where you could get this data. So there is something called as, it's just an example. There are a lot of ways in which you can store the data for R&D, which a pharmaceutical company does. One of the ways is, and I've worked on a pharmaceutical client with a pharmaceutical client before. They used to have something called as project systems, which is a module in SAP. You could also have the FDA historical data. So these are some data sources which you need to have to calculate your drug approval probability. Probable tools, potential tools or softwares which could be used or are used in all of the process: SAP, SQL, R, SAS, and Tableau. So how do you calculate that? You start with the descriptive, you move on to the predictive, and then thirdly, you do the prescriptive. What do I mean by that? When I say descriptive, what you're trying to do is you're trying to look at the relationships between different variables and trying to see if there is an effect on the probability. So you have, as I mentioned earlier, so you have a large molecule drug and a small molecule drug. You have different areas in which you usually have your drug: the oncology, cancer drug, or infectious disease. Time of the year, number of clinical trials. It could also be that how many trials are you doing. The approval by an FDA could depend upon the number of trials that you have done, or the quality of trials that you have done, the kind of sampling that you have done for your trials. So there are a lot of these factors which go into creating a drug, and all of these could affect the probability that your drug is going to get approved or not. And what descriptive analytics does is basically it gives you the relationship, or it helps you understand the whole system, and it gives you the relationship between these variables. Once you understand the whole system, the next thing is to predict the system. So the first part is understanding the system through descriptive analytics. Then you move on to predictive analytics, where you use different models to predict the probability of your approval. So in this case, you can use models like logistic regression. You could use things like neural networks. So these are models through which you can actually calculate the probability. And once you create that model, the next part is the prescription part. Now, what do we mean by prescription? The point here is that I would want to increase the probability of my drug approval. And if I need to increase the probability, then I need to make sure that all the controlling factors that I have in my hand, I try to tweak it in such a way so that I can get the maximum probability. I would want to increase the probability of my approval because quite literally that means that I can make my plans much better. Because if I know that something is going to happen 90% of the times, then it is easy for me to take a decision. If there is something which happens only 10% of the time, then it becomes difficult for me to decide what should I do next. That's why my purpose through prescriptive analytics is to make sure that I increase the probability. So it could be, just to give you a fact, so I was just going through some cases on drug approval, some articles basically, and what it mentioned was that oncology and small molecule drug are something which FDA uh, approves much frequently than other kind of drugs. So as a company, you could say that I am taking a strategic decision to move towards creating drugs which are in the area of oncology and are basically small molecule drug. Okay. For people from the finance background, you can think of this as trying to find the probability of a loan default. Or let's say people from of a retail or CPG, you can think of probability of a campaign effectiveness and its effect on demand. Basically, this probability is going to completely affect the demand of my drug. In this case, there are two drugs, A and B, and the probability is going to affect the expected demand for that drug. And once you have the expected demand, then accordingly you will decide whether I should have a specialized unit or whether I should have a flexible unit. Moving on to the second part where data science is used is forecasting. I think this is something which is known to many of you, but still the accuracy of forecasting is very, very important in all the cases. So again, you have two types of it, and I'll tell you the difference as in where and when is it used. So one is the time series. It's basically used everywhere. It's one of the most easiest way of doing forecasting, which is you have time on your x-axis and you have demand on your y-axis, and on the basis of time there are things which are there is something called seasonality, there is something called cyclicity, there's something called a level, and there's something called a trend. So these are like four components of any time series data that you may have. You will take these four components, you will model them in different tools. It could be done on R, it could be done on SAS, it could be done on any analytical tool. This example that I'm showing you was done on Tableau and R on the left hand side, and on that basis you do your forecasting. Talking about this, and what happens in a time series forecasting is more or less it kind of gives you a point estimate. There could be a range of demand, but more or less it's a point estimate. As in, if a certain condition changes suddenly, you won't be able to get the demand because time series assumes that whatever conditions happen throughout a year will repeat itself this year too. That is something which time series demand or time series model assumes. What happens is in a cause and effect forecasting is that it doesn't assume you. It takes in all the variables which actually affects your demand, and then on that basis you can actually tweak those levers, and if those levers change during a year, you can actually get the you can actually get the set demand. Like in this case, for our case, it could be that there is of course the price factor on which the demand will change, which is more like a price elasticity which is like the classic economic theory in this case. Then there are other factors like competition. If there is a certain competition or there is another pharmaceutical company which is your big competitor, on that basis again your prices may change, and on that basis your demand may change. So all these factors kind of affect the demand of your drug. There are other things too. In this case, it's more like a CPG context. The winter flag basically is what time of the year is it, then what was the rainfall in that year. So these are dependent on the industry in which you are. If I talk about the financial domain, it would be a cash flow forecast. So you want to forecast the revenues, you want to forecast the cost of goods sold, or what you could do is to predict your operating cash, you could look at cost of capital, probability of default. You could look at the share price. Individually, you could look at the income levels and the credit ratings if you're looking at an individual creditor. So there are these different factors which needs to be considered in a cause and effect forecasting. Once you have a good forecast and you have a good probability, in this case, you now know that the probability of A passing through the FDA is certain X, and X has to be from 0 to 1. For B, it is some Y, and then you also know the demand for those A and B drugs. So what is the next step usually? So till now, what we have done through data science is the two risks that we had. One was the demand risk. We kind of got the demand, and the other was the approval risk, and we got the probability. Still, the next part in risk management or risk analytics is to make sure or create different scenarios on that basis, which is what we did in this case. So what we did in this case was basically, I'll just try to explain to you what this whole tree means. What we have done here is we have tried to calculate the net present cost over 5 years for each of the scenarios. So if you have, so you basically have a decision that you have to make. There are, if you can see, there is A and B, the two drugs. I hope you're able to see it. Let me just use a drawing tool. Yeah, spotlight would be good. So this is A, one drug, B, another drug. And the decision basically that we needed to make was, should we go for a specialized unit or should we go for a flexible unit? Now, if you look at this percentage, 15%, this is the probability that I am talking about. Through data science, we found out, or through different models, whether it was through logistic regression or whether it is through neural network, what I found out was that this is the probability of drug A being approved. So you can look at both the scenarios. So I'm trying to create scenarios which is 15% and 15% for success and 85% for failure. If that is the case, 75.24, it's in USD million. This is basically the net present cost if it's a success. If it's a failure, as in if the drug is not produced and we go in and set up a specialized unit anyway, so because we have to take a decision today, right? We need to decide today whether we need to set up a specialized unit or a flexible unit. So I need to go and put in the money today. In that case, we lose basically around 50.57, or this is the total cost in this case. If we set up a flexible unit, and this is the 54.27 is the expected net present cost. So that is basically 75.24 multiplied by 0.15 plus 50.57 multiplied by 0.85. And this is the expected net present cost that you get for a specialized unit. Similarly, for a flexible unit, if the success is 15%, the net present cost it has 116.01, and if it's a failure, then the net present cost is 0. So you can understand the implications of how risk is playing with our decision today. If the drug is not approved and I go and put in a flexible unit, I lose nothing, 0 cost. If it's a success with the given demand that we have, the cost is pretty huge. If we compare it with a specialized one, you will find that if it's success with the given demand, the cost is lesser than the cost from a flexible unit. So if it's a success, I will go and put in a specialized plant. If it's a failure, I'll go and try to put a flexible plant. But life is not so easy, because you don't know whether it's going to be a success or a failure. There is a probability attached to it. That's why you take the expected value. So you have 54.27 coming from, for this particular success probability, you have the net present cost as 54.27 and flexible as 17.40. So with this given demand, with this probability, success probability, I will go in for a flexible unit because it costs me less to put a flexible unit than a specialized unit for this success probability. Now, same is the case for drug B. And of course, if there are more than two, you will go on and create more scenarios on that basis. Now, our work has not finished up until now. We need to now do some more scenario analysis, or we need to do more sensitivity analysis where now we change the probabilities and then accordingly find out what is at what place should I have specialized and not flexible. Because in this case, what did we choose? We chose that flexible unit needs to be chosen given this probability. So with sensitivity analysis, we'll find out at what probability I need to choose specialized and not flexible. Just a second. Okay, so this is how we did it. So as you can see, there's an input probability for A and B, and this 0.15, 0.24 comes from your model. It comes from your logistic model, it comes from your neural network model, and it gets it gets put here in the scenario analysis. And that on that basis, the net present cost, and I'm not showing it here because I don't want to go into the more details. Of course, I have a model working in a sheet, Excel sheet. I am also putting in the demand that we got from forecasting, because if I don't have the demand, I will not be able to calculate the cost. I need to understand how much I need to produce, right? So this net present cost is the cost of setting up the unit and is also the cost of producing those units over a period of 5 years. That's why it is named as net present cost. So this net present cost actually contains both the things that we calculated, the demand for that drug and the probability of approval for that drug. This is where you basically do the scenario analysis and come out with ways in which we should be ready to produce, or ways in which we should be ready to implement a specialized unit or a flexible unit. Okay, so this is where the scenario analysis ends. The next topic is more about, if risk analytics is so good, when are the instances when it doesn't work? Well, it doesn't work if you do not have the past data. You only have the future or the current data. In that case, it's very, very difficult. This is a case where if you have people who have subject matter expertise, who have been there for, let's say, more than 15, 20 years, many a times they know much, much more than what risk analytics is going to tell you. And thirdly, the accuracy of the variables that you are measuring. It's very, very important. The variables that you will measure to create your models, if they are not accurate enough, then the values that you're going to get and the scenarios, the risk scenarios that you create are not going to help you out in any way. Just to repeat myself, when there is no history or precedent related to risk being considered, or when historical data may not be contextually right, this is one of the reasons where risk analytics will not work. Secondly, as already mentioned, when decision makers have legitimate expertise and decision making is strategic in nature. I mentioned that earlier, right? If something is strategic, usually it is done for a timeline of 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, and you'd like to make sure that you only complement your analysis with data rather than make it the basis for your decision making. And thirdly, when key variables can't be measured accurately or can't be measured at all, in that case, you are better off not doing risk analytics. Tools which are being used for some of the examples that I just showed you. So it's basically you have R, you have SAS, you have SPSS, you have MicroStrategy, you have Veka, you have Tableau, and surprisingly, because not surprisingly, you have Excel too. I think that's like one of the most popular tools. That's why I have not like put it on the slide here. Next steps for all of you. So I have put it into like 3 buckets. One is you need to educate yourself in whichever domain or in whichever in the Venn diagram that I showed, in whichever area you are in, whether you are a domain expert trying to go into data science, whether you are someone who knows data science but trying to go into this particular domain, or thirdly, you are someone who's interested in both of them, what you need to do is start to educate yourself. And I'm just talking right now more from a technical perspective, because domain expertise is not easy, as in that domain expertise you need to have some kind of an experience. That is the most invaluable education that you will get. But for the other part, which is the data science part, there are a lot of things that you can learn: segmentation, statistical clustering, predictive models, event simulation, scenario analysis. There are a lot of statistical and machine learning concepts like regression, which is like the most popular and almost everyone uses it. But you'd be surprised to know that many people don't use regression in the right way. Nevertheless, so you have bootstrapping, you have clustering, decision trees. These are all like machine learning concepts. You can learn all of them through different tools. You have R, SAS, you have Excel, you have Hadoop. You try to remain in the ecosystem. So it's basically that if you want to be in data science and risk management, you need to somehow be in this ecosystem. A couple of places where you could go and join would be there's something called Consortium for Data Analytics and Risk, and there are other communities like Society for Risk Analysis. So you could just go and be a part of these communities. And thirdly, the most important is application. In whichever business fields you are in, you need to make sure that you start applying it. Of course, you want to do it on a small scale or a pilot scale so that you can show it to your higher management and basically at least have some kind of a wind on your sails before you go in and do it big time. So that's why I said the third part is actually the application part. So if you are in all these, or you educate yourself, you are in the ecosystem and you try to apply, those are the best things that you could do to learn risk analytics. That's it from my end. If there is any other question from your end, I am happy to answer all of you.
Kunal, thank you so much. And we're going to take a look at the questions here. One of the most common question, and I'll handle this one real quick because a couple of people have asked this, is there going to be a copy, a video, a recording of this session that they can loop back around and watch again in the future at their leisure? And the answer to that is yes, all of our sessions are recorded. It takes some time to put the recording through our production team and get it ready for posting. To my knowledge, these are then posted to the YouTube channel for Simplilearn. So you can go ahead and go to YouTube, find the Simplilearn channel, and subscribe to that. And you should see any new recordings showing up there. I believe they also perhaps go into the Simplilearn platform for members to access. So that should answer the question for a couple of folks on that sort of thing. We have a couple of folks here, sir, asking about the most appropriate tools and skills and additional trainings that one might need. In other words, I guess the best way to present the question would be, aside from a specific analytics or risk management training and certification, what other kinds of tools or skill sets or certifications might one need to pursue? Python, Tableau, SAS. We have a couple of folks asking about what maybe the most valuable additional skill sets would be for someone to pursue.
Sure. So actually it depends upon, the answer to most of the questions is usually it depends. Just going to more details, it's actually the scope or the function or the industry in which you're trying to go to. There is not like one tool or an overarching tool which does wonders in like every industry or every kind of analysis. Just to give you an example, let's talk about R, SAS, Excel, and Python, let's say. I'm just like kind of comparing these four tools, right? If I take the example of R, it's an open source tool, and it's easy to do it yourself individually. It's easy buy-in from your management, because you can go and tell them that it's a free out tool. If there is a new kind of a model that comes in from the academia, it's easy to replicate it in R because there are people who will do it for you through different packages. Talking about SAS, I think it has been used for like more than 2 decades now. So yeah, it is much more extensive, and it has it's much easier to do a SAS rather than to learn R. As in, if you don't want to put in that effort, there is a good user interface in SAS. So that's like pretty easy for you to begin with. Of course, it comes with its own licensing fees and other things. It has support, whereas in R it's more community driven. Going on into Excel, I think many of us still use Excel, and Excel is a very powerful tool. You can still do so much of analysis in Excel, and it is very easy, very intuitive, and many of us already know. There are integrations that Excel can have with SAS or with R specifically. Talking about Python, I think I saw that question too. There are some people asking about Python. That is, it's also, Python is actually, if you are not a programmer, it's a little difficult to learn. As in, but if you are a programmer, it's like one of the best analytical tools that you have today. So if you haven't learned programming, or you don't know programming before, it is better to move to an R or a SAS rather than a Python. But if you already are programming and you know Python, then it's easy to jump from programming to analytics, because there are a lot of good packages even in Python. There are like NumPy. There are a lot of good packages in Python too. So it depends. It depends completely on the industry. Like if you want to do time forecasting, you would rather go to SAS. If you want to do complex analysis like neural network, you would rather go to R, because you won't have it in SAS. Of course, Excel is like useless in both the cases because of the amount of data that you have to deal with. And Python, again, you can do both, but it's not easy to do. That's where I guess I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I think that you answered several people's questions there by getting into those specific tools, so I appreciate that. I hope that answers your question, Umameshwar, and Divyansh. Hopefully we addressed what you were sort of trying to get at there. A couple of folks are asking about first steps or next steps in pursuing a career in risk analytics, and you've sort of addressed that in your final couple of slides. I am going to post into the chat module. Folks, take a look at your dashboard, not for the question module, but for the chat module, and I'm posting a couple of links there. One of them is a link to some articles on the Simply Learn site about risk management and career opportunities and education opportunities and trends and so forth. And the other link is a link to the search for data scientists under the courses section of our site, and that'll give you a jump start on finding some of the available courses for you. And then, of course, you can always ask our support team to help you find the appropriate course to meet your needs. Vikas is asking two questions here. One, you mentioned bootstrapping in one of your late slides, and if we could just clarify what the term bootstrapping means. And then the second question from Vikas is, how do we do predictive analysis in Hadoop? Is there a particular tool that you recommend for predictive analysis in Hadoop?
Okay. So I'll answer both the questions. So I'll not go too much into detail about bootstrapping, but it's basically a technique through which you multiply your data for your analysis. Just to give you an example, let's say that you are trying to analyze. Let's say you're trying to forecast a demand for a brand of a company. Let's say it's a watch brand, and you just have 50 records, and you would want to do analysis on that and try to do a forecasting. Now the problem is that just with 50 records, it's not easy to do good forecasting, and it is very, very difficult to get an accurate forecasting. So in that case, you will use bootstrapping, which is basically you will create data from that 50 data records. So it is a method through which from that 50 records, you create more samples. And instead of 50, you can have like 50,000 records just from 50 records. And it is a very popular technique. And in fact, the guy who found out that model actually got an award in the analytics world for that. So you can go into details of that. The second question is it necessary to learn Hadoop, I saw, or how is like Hadoop used for predictive analytics? So Hadoop is actually, I guess, you already know, it's like a file system kind of a tool where what you do is mostly it is used for unstructured data. And if you have to really do some predictive modeling on top of it, one, you have to write a code on it. And if you want to avoid writing those codes and you want to use the already available packages that are already there, you could just connect Hadoop with R. So in one of the projects that I have done, what we had done was we had used Hadoop to clean the unstructured data or the data from social media which had come in, and then we used the data that Hadoop threw to R, did the analysis, and then showed it through a Tableau, because Tableau is usually used as more like a visual. It's like a more a visual tool. Of course, it has its own analytic capabilities, but that's how we did it. There's no right or wrong answer, but it's easier if you know these other tools which can integrate with Hadoop.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. We have time, I think, for one more question, or we run the risk of pushing the next webinar into a late start as well. And I think we can look at Naveen's question from earlier in the session. Naveen is interested in correlating outliers with stock market movement and trends. Are there specific strategies or techniques or tools that you might recommend for correlating stock market data with your own data?
So I would say that you should look at certain packages. So there are stock market packages in R. So I haven't gone into the details of it, as in that I haven't done it myself, but I would strongly suggest that there are certain stock market packages in R, if you know R, where there are models which are already made. What you just need to do is kind of as simply as put in the data, stock market data, and then it will identify the outliers and it will try to model on that basis. So I would suggest that just look at those financial solutions in R itself.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Folks, we are up at, it's 45 minutes past the hour now. We may not be able to get to all the questions, but I want to thank everybody for bearing with us with our late start, and I hope we were able to give you enough information to make this all as fascinating as it was for me. I'm going to share one last link into your chat module, and that's going to point you at the page where the upcoming webinars for Simply Learn are listed. So take a look at that, and please feel free to scroll down the list and register for as many of those free webinars as you would like to join. We'd be happy to have you on board. It's always a pleasure, and we love having a big group with lots of really smart questions. So with that, we are at the end of our session. Kunal, thank you so much for being here. It's always fun to hang out with you. Lots of great information.